Hello everyone. My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 21 years old. And on my 21st birthday, my father stood in front of nearly 50 friends, relatives, and employees, raised his champagne glass, and announced that by the end of the weekend, I would finally return his company. Everyone applauded. Some even stood to clap, because everyone believed the same story. That my father had temporarily placed the business in my name for legal reasons. And now it was time to give it back. Only one person in the room knew the truth. Me. Because 6 months earlier, the company had legally become mine, not by accident, not by mistake, by my grandfather's decision. And my father knew absolutely nothing about it. To understand why, you have to understand my family. My father, Richard Bennett, built Bennett Industrial Supply from a tiny warehouse outside Columbus, Ohio. He started with one delivery truck, one employee, one customer. For 28 years he worked harder than anyone I had ever met. By the time I was born, the company was worth more than $560,000. It wasn't a giant corporation, but in our town, it was respected. It employed 43 people. Some families had worked there for 2 generations. My father wasn't just their employer. He was the reason they paid their mortgages. Growing up, I admired him. When other girls played with dolls, I sat in his office learning how invoices worked. When I was 12, I knew every employee by name. At 15, I was helping organize inventory every summer. Everyone joked that I would become the next CEO. Everyone. Except my father. Whenever someone mentioned it, he would laugh. Then point at my younger brother, Dylan. He's the future of this company. People smiled, even though Dylan hated the business. He loved motorcycles, parties, weekend trips, anything except work. I never complained. I simply worked harder. I graduated high school with honors, finished 2 years of college studying business administration. Every afternoon after class, I drove straight to the warehouse. Nobody asked me to. I just believed the company deserved my best. Slowly, employees stopped going to my father with problems. They came to me. Suppliers called me. Customers trusted me. Payroll mistakes, late deliveries, inventory shortages, I solved them. Quietly, without asking for recognition. Whenever profits improved, Dad congratulated Dylan. Whenever something went wrong, Dad called me into his office. You should have caught this. Eventually, I stopped expecting praise. I only wanted the company to survive. My grandfather saw everything. His name was Harold Bennett. He founded the original family business before selling it to my father decades earlier. Even after retirement, he still received monthly reports. Every number, every contract, every expense. One afternoon, he invited me to lunch, nothing unusual. We often had lunch together. Halfway through dessert, he asked one simple question. Who actually runs this company? I smiled awkwardly. Dad does. Grandpa smiled. No. Who keeps it alive? For a moment, I didn't answer. Then, for the first time, I told someone the truth. I explained how Dylan rarely came to work, how my father ignored financial warnings, how I spent nights fixing mistakes nobody else even noticed. Grandpa listened, never interrupted. When I finished, he quietly pushed his coffee away. I knew. He continued. I've been watching for 3 years. The next week, Grandpa invited me to his attorney's office. I assumed he wanted advice. Instead, his attorney placed several documents in front of us. Grandpa folded his hands. Olivia, I'm getting older. I have to protect the people who depend on this company. I looked at him. Confused, he continued. Not the family. The employees. Then he slid one document across the table. Read page 4. My hands trembled. It was the ownership agreement. A family trust. One I had never heard about. Years ago, Grandpa had quietly transferred controlling ownership into that trust. My father had always managed the company, but legally, he wasn't the majority owner. Grandpa still controlled everything. Then he smiled. I've decided who should take over. I felt my stomach tighten. He looked directly at me. You! I couldn't breathe. I can't accept this. You already earned it. I'm only 20. So was I when I started. The attorney nodded. Everything had already been prepared. 6 months later. The transfer became official. 51% ownership. Voting control. Every document was legal. Every signature verified. Nobody could challenge it. Except, nobody knew. Not even my father. Grandpa had one condition. Don't tell anyone. Not yet. For 6 months. Nothing changed. At least on the surface. I continued working. Dad continued treating Dylan like the future owner. Then came my birthday. Dad insisted on throwing a huge party. Employees, family, friends. Nearly 50 people gathered at our house. The backyard looked beautiful. Lights hung across the trees. Everyone laughed. Until dessert. Dad stood, tapped his glass. The room became quiet. My daughter turns 21 today. Everyone applauded. She's been helping the company for years. More applause. Then, his smile changed. Tomorrow she'll finally sign the company back where it belongs. Everyone clapped again, except me. Dad noticed. He laughed. What? Don't tell me you've changed your mind. The room laughed with him. I quietly answered. What company? His smile froze. The company. Mine. I looked him straight in the eyes. It's not yours anymore. Silence. Complete silence. Dad laughed again. Nice joke? I'm not joking. He frowned. What are you talking about? I slowly stood. Grandpa transferred ownership 6 months ago. Dad looked toward Grandpa. Grandpa remained seated, calm. He simply nodded once. My father's face turned white. You did what? Grandpa answered calmly. I protected the company. The party instantly changed. Nobody touched their food. Nobody spoke. Dad stared at Grandpa. You had no right. Grandpa replied quietly. I had every legal right. You stole my company. No, I saved it. Dad slammed his glass onto the table. I built that business. Grandpa nodded. You did. But lately, Olivia has been keeping it alive. Everyone looked at me. For the first time, employees weren't pretending anymore. Several slowly nodded. One warehouse supervisor finally spoke. He's right. Dad turned toward him. What? The supervisor swallowed. We call Olivia whenever something goes wrong. Another employee added. She's the reason we survived last winter. Another voice. She negotiated the biggest contract we've ever signed. Then another. And she saved us from bankruptcy after the shipping lawsuit. Dad looked around the yard. Every face suddenly seemed unfamiliar. Because for years, he had been hearing only what he wanted to hear. Dylan finally stood. So what? Dad still deserves it. I looked at him. How many employees do we have? He hesitated. I don't know. How much do we pay every month in payroll? Silence. Who's our biggest customer? Nothing. He looked embarrassed. Dad tried changing the subject. This isn't about business. This is family. Grandpa shook his head. No. For years you made business into family. You rewarded your son for loyalty. You ignored your daughter for competence. No one argued. Because everyone knew it was true. Dad walked away from the party. without another word. Guests quietly began leaving, one by one. Employees thanked me before they left. Some hugged Grandpa. By sunset, only our family remained. Dad finally returned. He looked different. Older, tired. He sat across from me, without looking into my eyes. Then he asked quietly, "Did you really want this?" I answered honestly, "No." He finally looked at me. "I only wanted you to see me." For the first time in years, he didn't have an answer. The following Monday, Dad came to the office, earlier than anyone expected. He entered my office, not his. Mine? He closed the door, placed a folder on my desk. Inside were resignation papers. "I'll leave." I looked up. "No." He seemed surprised. "I don't want your job. You own the company. I want my father." He sat down slowly. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then, he quietly admitted something I never expected to hear. "I spent 20 years trying to build a son who looked like me, and ignored the daughter who became better than me. I felt tears fill my eyes. So don't leave." He nodded slowly. "What do you want?" I smiled. "I want us to run it together." 6 months later, everything looked different. Dad finally accepted advice. I became CEO. Dad became chairman of the board. He focused on mentoring younger employees, not controlling everyone. Dylan surprised us all. He admitted business wasn't his passion. He became a firefighter. For the first time in his life, he loved going to work. The company continued growing. Employees trusted leadership again. Profits increased. The biggest victory happened one Friday afternoon. Dad walked into my office carrying 2 cups of coffee. He smiled. "I've got a question." I laughed. "What?" He placed 1 cup on my desk. "What do you think we should do next?" It was such a simple question. But for me, it meant everything, because for the first time, he wasn't giving orders. He was asking for my opinion. People often think inheritance is about money. It isn't. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance is finally being seen. My grandfather didn't leave me a company. He gave my father one last chance to become the man I had admired as a little girl. And thankfully, he didn't waste it. If you've stayed with me until the end, ask yourself one question. Are you rewarding people for who they are? Or simply for who you expected them to become? Because sometimes, the person you've been overlooking is already carrying everything you've built.